And so welcome everybody. This is the third webinar in our year-long series on emerging Midwest invasives. As you just heard, we are recording and we will be posting this recording later this month. So my name is Michelle Blasker. I'm the coordinator for the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, or MIPIN. Today we're going to talk about poison hemlock and teasel. Before I formally introduce our speakers today, I just want to give you a quick intro into MIPIN and some context for how this series was developed. So let me get our presentation, our opening slides started here. Okay. So the Midwest Invasive Plant Network was formed in 2006. We're a network that helps coordinate invasive species outreach and activities across the Midwest. And our goal is to reduce the impacts of invasive plants in our region. And our region, as you can see in this map, includes 9 states as well as the province of Ontario. This webinar was inspired by a survey that we conducted at the end of 2022. We asked plant experts across the Midwest which species they consider to be early detection species. And we're defining that as plants that are either not in the Midwest yet, invasive plants, of course, but that are in neighboring regions, or plants that are here, but maybe just so far kind of in isolated pockets. But in both cases, there's a high potential just for spread. So we want to make sure that these plants are on everybody's radar and that they are being reported. We're happy to report we got feedback from every state and province in our region. And the 10 plants that you see listed here were the ones that very clearly rose to the top of that list. And this created the basis for this webinar series. I also created a flyer that you can download from the MIPIN website that highlights each of these 10, there's a photo, brief description, and also identifies which plants are of greatest concern for each state or province in our region, which is, I think, really helpful. Before I hand things over to Emily and Chris, I just want to make sure that you're aware of a resource that MIPIN has available. I'm sure Emily and Chris are going to talk about management as well. But MIPIN has a controlled database that is run in coordination with the University of Wisconsin. So there's a database of about 50 different invasive plants, and you can do a customizable search for all the different management techniques that are available for that particular plant. And I just want to also mention that if you're enjoying this presentation today and this ongoing series, we really encourage you to make a donation to MIPIN. Even just a $5, $10 donation really helps support our invasive species educational efforts. Because again, we have a really full presentation scheduled this morning or afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in. I'm going to drop some things in the chat, some links to the resources that I just mentioned, as well as a donation link. So thank you for giving me a few minutes of your attention. I'm going to go ahead and invite Emily to share her screen while I do a formal introduction here. So Emily Finch is the invasive species specialist for the Dubois, Davies, and Martin County Soil and Water Conservation Districts located in southern Indiana. She spent several years managing invasive species in Wisconsin state parks, and then served as the coordinator for the Wild Rivers Invasive Species Coalition, which is a 5-county SISMA along the Wisconsin-Michigan border. After moving to Indiana in 2016, she started working with the nonprofit group Southern Indiana Cooperative Invasives Management, or SICM, as a part-time website manager, steering committee member, and then finally as a full-time regional specialist in their Indiana Invasives Initiative project. In her current position, she coordinates 2 SISMAs, provides technical assistance to landowners, and continues to collaborate with neighboring SISMAs and with SICM. Emily has a BS in Environmental Science from Northland College, and she joined the MIPIN board in 2020 and is currently our vice president. We're going to hear from Chris Henze second, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce him now. He is the roadside vegetation manager and a county weed commissioner for the Johnson County Secondary Road Department in eastern Iowa. Chris has been managing noxious weeds and invasive species and roadsides for nearly 20 years, while being in charge of the Integrated Roadside Vegetation Management Program. So while on the job, you might find Chris conducting prescribed burns, planting native grasses or wildflowers, installing erosion controls. Might find him on a tractor or running a chainsaw, He's also the chairperson of the Hawkeye Cooperative Weed Management Area and is active in grant activities as well as invasive species management and education efforts. And Chris has served on the MIPID Board of Directors since 2010. So got a great couple of speakers here, and I'm going to hand it off to Emily.
All right, thanks, Michelle. And one thing I do have to correct, and I made the same mistake when I moved down here, the main county I work out of is actually pronounced Dubois instead of Dubois. I know all of us that learned some of the French place names up in the upper Midwest. I know it runs counterintuitive, but yep, Dubois County. And actually, before I get a lot into poison hemlock, for those of you that might not know where I'm speaking from today, I coordinate 3 counties in southwestern Indiana. And I do have to give a big shout out to the funding that supports my position, which is from Clean Water Indiana grant. Those that are tuning in from Indiana might actually know too that the State Soil Board is actually meeting earlier today to discuss an increase in funding in those funds through the Indiana State Department of Agriculture. So very exciting work ahead for that fund. I work, with SISMAs, various invasive managers, a lot of private landowners, and actually as part of our current Clean Water Indiana grant in 2021, our 3 soil and water conservation districts actually conducted roadside surveys for poison hemlock in our area. And there's Dubois County even had little carved magnets with poison hemlock on them. So it's definitely a big issue in our area. So in preparation for this, I did a little bit of research to see the distribution of poison hemlock across the rest of the Midwest. So this is from EdMaps, and I was actually surprised to see some of those more northern locations, even up in the UP, do have some occurrences. 8 of our Midwest states and provinces list poison hemlock in some way. Ontario, Ohio, Indiana, Iowa, and Minnesota all have it on noxious weed lists. And it is listed only as invasive in Wisconsin, Kentucky, and Illinois. There are some that might have it listed as both. I know Indiana, it is on both the invasive plant list and the noxious weed list. I could not find a listing status for Michigan or Missouri. So when we get to the Q&A, or if anyone wants to put in the chat, if you know if either of those states have the species on any official designated list, please let us know. Here in Indiana, it was added to our noxious weed list in 2018, and the noxious weed list here, landowners are supposed to be controlling any of the noxious weeds that are on their property. Enforcement of that has varied county to county and through the years. And unfortunately, poison hemlock can spread very easily via seeds, often from mowing, or in our area, it seems to have exploded kind of exponentially in recent years once it has started growing along creeks and ditches and being spread by water there. So this is an example of a very thick poison hemlock patch growing along an agricultural ditch, picture from our roadside surveys. And it's so dense you can't even pick out individual plants. There's just so much of it there in full bloom. Poison hemlock, as the name implies, and as folks are probably aware, is highly toxic. And that is because of the presence of poisonous alkaloids that makes it toxic to all mammals. So humans, livestock, pets, but it's not toxic to non-mammals such as birds or insects. Ingestion is the primary route for poisonings from poison hemlock. That is what you need to be primarily concerned about. There has been some misinformation out there about it reacting to skin, and I believe that those are just cases of misinformation and confusion between the different species in the carrot family. As poison hemlock, cow parsnip, giant hogweed can cause severe, skin burns. Poison hemlock does not cause that. That's not to say that some individuals might not be sensitive, but it's not the main concern. The main concern is ingestion. There is rare cases of poisoning taking place through the mucous membranes or through cuts, other routes for it to get past your skin barrier. So there have been a few cases where people were doing, extensive mowing or cutting of plants, and those chemicals can aerosolize and gain entry through mucous membranes. So it is possible, and it is important to be aware of some of the symptoms. At the bottom of the screen are just some quotes from Poison Control website about some of the symptoms of toxicity from poison hemlock. For humans, it affects the nervous system, causes tremors, paralysis, breathing difficulties, muscle damage, and kidney failure may occur in severe cases. So it's important to, if you're out there and especially doing manual control or mechanical control, to be aware of your environment and your personal health while doing work. For poison hemlock ID, poison hemlock is a biennial, meaning that it lives for 2 years. The first year it is a basal rosette, and then the second year is when plants bolt and send up a flowering stem, flower, produce seed, and die. And a lot of our outreach here has been focused on getting folks to be able to identify poison hemlock before it's flowering. So in this series of pictures, you can see some of the size differences. On the far left are poison hemlock seedlings. So those are newly germinated plants in their first year of life. And then the next photo with the glove in it shows a second year rosette that has not started bolting yet. I believe that photo was probably taken in February, possibly early March, but probably February down here, as the poison hemlock rosettes can be green through winter. They're just a lot smaller, so people tend to miss them. And when we talk about control, I'll talk about treating them earlier like that. And then as we progress to the right side of the screen, you can see that the leaves, which are compound, and I always describe as fern-like, get much larger. A key distinguishing characteristic is that the leaves do not have any hairs on them. When poison hemlock starts bolting, we talk about purple spotting or mottling on the stem. And on the far right, you can see how sometimes that is also present at the base of the plant, even in the rosette stage. So bolting is what we refer to as the plant preparing to send up that flowering stem. Here where I am in southern Indiana, this happens in spring, usually around May. The flowering stems are stout, hollow, smooth, sometimes with light ribbing on them, with the distinctive purple mottling, and again, no hairs. I kind of liken it in southern Indiana. It tends to always be bolting right around spring planting when everyone is very, very busy. Actually, just last week, I saw my very first flowering plants here, just a few of them starting to open. So that kind of gives you a timeline. And here are some examples of how that purple mottling on the stem can vary. So it can be, it's not, spotting almost doesn't quite capture it because it can be very irregular. You can have what looks like spots, you can have huge portions that are almost solid purple. And then my favorite photo, and hopefully this comes across on your screens better than it does on a PowerPoint projector, is the top right there. What I'm pointing to with my glove on there are some very faint purple spots on the base of a leaf of a rosette of poison hemlock. And it's very faint and it's hard to capture sometimes in photos, but in person you can see some of that coloration there. Now, flowering. Like many of the other plants in the carrot family, poison hemlock produces small white umbels or umbrella-shaped clusters of flowers. Down in my part of the Midwest, this happens May through June. And you can get some very large plants with multiple flowering branches. And the flowering is an important thing to take into consideration because as a biennial, the only effective way to control populations is to prevent seed production. And so while plants, when they're flowering, are the most visible, it's often too late for many effective control options. The good news is that unlike many of our other weed seeds that can sometimes last for over a decade in the soil, poison hemlock seeds are really only viable for about 2 to 3 years. So with in a much shorter time frame, if you are successful in preventing any new seed production and new seeds are not being brought in, you can actually get rid of poison hemlock populations. Here is an example about, I don't know if it's genetics, I don't know if it's site differences, but how the plants can vary. On the left, you see a couple of plants that are flowering, and they're much more thin and spindly looking, still very tall, but not large and bushy. And then on the right is one single poison hemlock plant that is just one plant. I will say it does take a little bit of time for it to get that many flowers. What will typically happen is it will flower and then side branches will start to come out. So if you just top the plant, you will often just have side branches come out and produce more flowers. But I ended up manually removing this photo on the right in one of our videos on our website. So I know it is just one plant. To compare some of the species poison hemlock sometimes gets confused for, in our part of the Midwest, Queen Anne's lace or wild carrot is a common one that people will think of when they think of the white umbel flowers. And if you look at the photo on the left with those white umbels, Queen Anne's lace blooms tend to be larger across, but more densely packed. It does not get nearly as tall as poison hemlock, so scale is a big difference there. It's much shorter. It doesn't have quite the same stout upright stem. There's no purple on the stems, and it does have hairs, which is why I was bringing that up as an ID characteristic. And you can kind of see the hairs on the leaves in the right photo, but I have another one coming up that will also help with that. It also blooms a little bit later, so we do not have any blooming Queen Anne's lace right now in our area. It will start blooming kind of partway through the cycle of poison hemlock blooming. Here is a great comparison that I took at one of our poison hemlock sites. I can't remember if it was March or April when I took this photo, but it was at the same site on the same day in spring. And on the left is a poison hemlock rosette, a second-year rosette that will end up flowering. And on the right is a Queen Anne's lace rosette. And here's a close-up of that Queen Anne's lace. So you can see the leaves are not quite as large and divided and fern-like as the poison hemlock leaves are. And you can really see those hairs there at the base of those leaves. Another one that is sometimes confused in our area is water hemlock, which is a native plant, although it is also highly toxic. In fact, some people say more so. It blooms just a little bit later than poison hemlock. And as the name suggests, it likes wet areas. It does not become invasive. It kind of keeps to some of those wet ditches or marshy spots. And leaves on the right there, you can see are not nearly as divided. It's a compound leaf, but it's not as finely divided. And no one would compare that really to a fern leaf. The only time I really recommend that landowners might want to manage this native species is if they have livestock in an area, because otherwise this is a native plant. It supports multiple pollinators, including black swallowtail butterflies. And I will note too, for those of you further north in the Midwest, there's a lot of white umbels. We often have that during UMISC conferences, are usually one of the presentations on distinguishing all the white umbel plants. Timing is the easiest way, I think, to help distinguish some of them. Timing and size. Poison hemlock control. How do we get rid of them? The good news is for small populations, individual plants, they are actually relatively easy to control manually. You can pull them, you can dig them, or if you have a nice sharp shovel, if you sever the plant below the surface of the soil, sever that taproot, that will kill it. It will not resprout from that. So if the plant hasn't started flowering yet, and you want a very simple, quick way to get rid of it, take a sharp shovel, sever it, flip it over, and just leave it there. It will die. If it doesn't have any flowers on it, you have no risk of any seeds being produced. We do recommend that you cover up just to be safe. And if there are flowers, I would recommend bagging those. I actually have a video where I demonstrate that. And here's one that I dug up so you can see that taproot. and why, maybe in the past that might have been mistaken for, carrot or other plants, and, mistakenly eaten and caused poisonings in the past. If you're using herbicide, there are a lot of herbicides that work. Glyphosate, triclopyr, 2,4-D. Usually I do recommend one of the broadleaf specific herbicides like triclopyr if you're broadcast spraying, because then you know that you're not killing all the grasses as well. You can keep some of that competition. But there's some of the handouts produced by Purdue Extension and UW Extension list several herbicide options. I have been trying to get landowners to spray plants much earlier. So even in February down by us, we do have warm days where the temperatures get above 50 degrees. And if you're spraying a green growing plant in those conditions, the herbicide will be effective at that time of year. The tricky thing that we have run into here is as plants start to bolt, usually around spring planting time, they do require higher rates of herbicide to be effective. So when we did our roadside surveys, we noted that several landowners, several farmers who had prepped their fields for planting by spraying all the weeds, those herbicide rates were too low to completely kill hemlock, but it stunted it. So we had all of these maybe half-size hemlock plants scattered through the field, but they were still blooming. So it wasn't, they might have decreased seed production, but they definitely didn't eliminate it. Which is why we've been trying to get folks to treat it before it's bolting, because we know it will take more herbicide in that stage. Mowing is not going to kill plants. Plants will resprout after being cut, and it can risk spreading seeds as well, based on the time of year. Now that said, frequent mowing through the summer may effectively prevent flowering, and this might be more of an option further north in the Midwest as well, where you have a shorter growing season. So it's, you can't completely discount it, but it's not usually the top choice for control. If you go to our website, I included a QR code here on the screen too, if anyone wants to capture that or get it in the recording. We put, as part of our outreach campaign with our Dubois County Weed Board, we put together an entire webpage on poison hemlock. So it includes my two favorite handouts on it from Purdue Extension and UW Extension, a bunch of photos, and a video series that we made during COVID that takes you through each stage of the plant and what to do during those stages. Here is my contact information as well. I actually won't be taking questions now. We're going to end up turning over things to Chris, and we'll take questions at the very end. So hold on to those. But if you need other outreach materials other than what you see on our website, please feel free to reach out to me. We put together a lot of outreach materials on poison hemlock, including a publisher file with items to put together a display board to use at county fairs and other events, some hemlock PSAs, some ad images to use online. We've really been drilling home poison hemlock outreach the last 2 years. A poison hemlock or noxious weed alert that we got sent to landowners in Dubois County with their tax statements. So I've been dealing a lot with poison hemlock the last couple of years. Chris, I am going to go into your slides now, and I'll mute myself, but you just tell me next when I need to progress the slides, okay?
Okay. All right, that'll work. Hi guys, as these guys have mentioned, I'm Chris Hensey with Roadside Vegetation Manager for Johnson County Secondary Roads here in East Central Iowa. So I got asked to speak about two different species of teasel, the Dipsacus species, common and cutleaf teasel. Basically, as we're going to talk about, they're very similar species. They look very similar other than a few characteristics. Same genus, just slightly different species. We're going to talk about distributions and control methods and identification, and then hopefully answer some questions about some of this species and poison hemlock. They're both crowding into Iowa, both on our early detection rapid response species list. So hopefully you can take some of this information today and take it home to wherever you're from. Okay, Emily. All right, first we're going to talk about cutleaf teasel, one of the two varieties or two in that family, the Dipsacus species. That's the Dipsacus laciniatus. So you can tell cut leaf is going to be real similar to the other one, the common teasel. It's going to be 6 to 8 feet tall, but you can look at the leaves along the base, and they're going to have this be lobed and basically cut leaf. They're real simple to identify. They are going to be real rigid and spiny, and we'll have a few pictures of that coming up as well. And then the seed heads, they kind of look like cone flowers, I guess, for lack of a better. I couldn't really find anything else that really closely resembled teasel species. But that of the two species, this is cut leaf teasel. We'll have a few pictures later on of one with many seed heads. Okay, Emily. So EdMaps, which is a great resource if you're trying to kind of find out what's growing in your area. This is the distribution map for cut leaf teasel, which you'll see in a second when we look at the common teasel. It's fairly widely distributed over the Midwest. Some species or some states more than others. We have it crowding in mostly from our east and south for whatever reason. If you go into some of our southern areas, some of the areas of Iowa and into Missouri and Illinois, you'll see literal forests of it, and we are seeing it march across Iowa now. And that being said, it is on our early detection and rapid response list for MIPN, but those are for some areas that it hasn't shown up yet. It's still early detection in some of our northern states, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, that sort of thing. Okay. So here's cut leaf teasel. You can kind of see what the leaves look like. These are the basal leaves, as just like poison hemlock. Both of the teasel species are biennial species, so they're going to take 2 years to produce a seed head. These are the rosettes, so the 1-year-old plants. The basal leaves are going to be deeply lobed, indented, and serrated. So that's one of the ways that you can tell the difference between the two species. They're both a problem species and both very invasive. So if you have either one, you need to jump on management fairly soon. And then on the right-hand side is what an infestation of what the rosette leaves will look like. So those are all 1-year-old plants that either this year, if it's early in the spring, they'll bolt, same as the poison hemlock. They will send up a seed head. But then those plants, if they're just 1-year-old plants, they'll grow like that for the first full year and then send up a seed head. Okay. So one of the adaptations that teasel has, it gives it an advantage over a lot of plants, is how those basal leaves come together, almost kind of like cup plant. If you're familiar with that one, which is a native wildflower, the leaves come together and form a cup, and it gathers water in there. So when it's real dry in June and July, and everything else is parched and dusty, it's still full of water. And usually when you're cutting it, it's full of bugs and other gross things that get all over you when you're trying to cut it. But that's one of the adaptations that's helped it to succeed and survive when it's real dry and dusty, like it's going to be here in June and July. Okay. And the other species that's in that genus is the common teasel, which is about the same thing, but the seed heads are roughly the same as a coneflower, other than some of them, and it's kind of interesting in that some get white and then some get a little bit of purple to it. And we get mostly white here, but I have seen common teasel get fairly purple, and then occasionally you'll see the long bracts up along this little spiny seed head. And if you grab those with bare hands, you'll know right exactly what it is, because it is pokey and it definitely fights back. And in the picture on the right and on the left, you can see that it's got spines on it, not really thorns, but more spines. So it does want to fight back a little bit, and it will get you if you grab it with bare hands. I think I've got a good picture next slide of the leaves of common teasel, so you can kind of compare the two, the rosettes on the left-hand side, and then the leaves of the adult plants and of the common teasel. You can see that those are they're whole along the entire edge of the leaf. They're not deeply lobed and ridged like cut leaf teasel, but the seed heads are very similar. The rosettes on the left, that's just like we talked about. Those are 1-year-old plants early in the season, and then also a good time to manage both species if you can get out there now and cut them or spray them. That's a great time to do it because you can manage a lot of plants in a big hurry. Okay, you can move to the next slide. And that's just the range of common teasel. It's much more widely distributed, nearly nationwide. I would guess that it's in North Dakota, but they just don't have it on their map yet, unfortunately. So we can move to the next slide. So both species of the teasel, common and cutleaf teasel, are biennial. They're going to produce a rosette in the first year, same as poison hemlock. As you'd seen, they're spiny. They're going to fight back, and when you grab them, they'll get you. And they're 3 to 8 feet tall. I would say in the one other point that they usually bolt in the second year to produce that oval seed head. We've seen a few times where they would stay a rosette for 2 years, not often, but that may be more of a southern state thing. But around here in Iowa, most of them grow and produce seed in 2 years. But occasionally, they will take longer than 2 years. Around here in Iowa, they're growing real well right now. They produce 10 to 30 seed heads, and each seed head can produce roughly 2,000 seeds per seed head. So 2,000 seed heads and 2,000 seeds per seed head and 30 seed heads per plant. It doesn't take long to produce a tremendous amount of seed, and rapidly can colonize and become monocultured in any kind of disturbed area. At least here in Iowa, a lot of the plants bloom in July and August, and then the adult plants die, produce seed, and we start over again the next year, just like most of the biennial species do. So one of the points that I want to make with teasel is that, like, the bottom is here, that the adult plants, if you mow them too early, mowing can be a tool, but if you mow them too early, that plant can still produce fertile seed heads on multiple short stalks. So I've seen places where we've gone out and mowed too early, but we could get in because it was dry enough to mow. And you go back 3 or 4 weeks later, and it's produced multiple seed heads back on that plant, and it's still going to try. We've also gone out with like machetes and cut full plants, adult plants, and if you cut them at the ground and not cut them into pieces or cut the seed heads off, that adult plant that's 6 or 8 feet tall has enough energy in it. If you just cut it at the ground, it can still produce seed. That flower head will still mature and produce good seed. So we really work hard to cut the seed heads off, and every seed head off every individual plant, and then cut the plant into several different pieces too. It might be overkill, but if we're going to take the time to manage it, we don't want it to produce seed. Okay. So why has this species been able to disperse so quickly and widely? Well, it got brought here, to use in flower decorations. Originally you found it a lot around cemeteries. It got used in flower decorations, and then people would put flower arrangements around gravestones, and then they would go back later on and they would clean up around the cemetery, and they would chuck all the old flower heads and arrangements over the fence, and they still would have live seed on those seed heads, so away they would go. So you can kind of see different examples here of it put into different flower arrangements, and unfortunately that still is happening. You still see people trying to paint them and use them in arrangements. Originally, long ago, that the seed heads got used in yarn production and cotton production because they could use it to. I'm not a seamstress or anything like that, but use it to work with fabric, to like raise the nap of fabric. And then the next slide. Also, unfortunately, people are very good at helping to move this species around. These are just pictures that I've used in multiple different presentations. That people think that the seed heads are cute, and they're probably harmless if there's no live viable seed there. But if a live plant had 2,000 seeds on it, there's a real good chance that it had viable seed on it when it got moved. So people create fun things, and you can make all kinds of things if you're into decorating. And unfortunately, this plant, when these get thrown out in the trash or wherever they end up, that live seed takes off and rapidly colonizes any disturbed area that it's in. Okay. And also, unfortunately, I'm working for a transportation department. I wish I could say that we weren't part of the problem, but transportation agencies statewide, nationwide, are part of the issue. We do a lot of mowing for noxious weed control, and unfortunately, if it's not properly timed, we can actually move a lot of these, not just teasel, but a lot of other noxious and invasive species. We pick up and move those species on our equipment. So if you can mow multiple times through the year, you could prevent seed production. But if you can't get there until July or August or September, when the seed heads have dried up and you mow through like this patch on the right, all you're doing is transporting that seed. You know, you're just moving it on down the road with your equipment. Also, occasionally we see people, and we try to work with these landowners where people would go in and actually hay a field that has teasel in it. And I don't believe cattle really enjoy eating it because it is so spiny, but it's a great way for that seed to be dispersed. And you can kind of see on the right, you know, if you see the adult plants, when those blooms turn white, you can see all the rosettes in the lawn part where it's being actively mown with a lawnmower, you know, turf type stuff. All those little tiny plants that you can see there are all teasel rosettes. Those are all first year plants. So you can see that it's picking up and moving. Those plants aren't staying put. Those have been there for at least a couple of years or probably more. So that plant will easily grab onto you and your mower and all of your equipment and get transported down the road. So unfortunately, transportation departments we can be part of the solution, but we are also part of the problem moving invasive species. Okay. You can kind of see on the right hand side what the adult seed heads look like, and they're very easy to spot, especially during the fall and winter. You know, there's really not a lot that looks a lot like them. You know, you'll see forests of them in some states, and you know, they're easy to pick out. They're usually 5, 6, 7 feet tall, and lots of them. But what we do is we spray rosettes in the early spring. We use a broadleaf herbicide product. You know, I have to give the standard, read the label. You know, that's what we have to say that. You know, the label's the law. Mostly broadleaf pesticides. Triclopyr is a good product. You can use Roundup. I caution people to use with Roundup because it does kill any sedges and grasses. So you know, you want to leave competition for other, you know, for other species or rather rosettes that are growing rather. So it is relatively easy to kill the rosettes with just a plain broadleaf pesticide. Once it becomes an adult plant and the plant has flowered and bolted, just like poison hemlock rather, you've got to have higher rates. And once the flower has turned white, we've had pretty good success spraying with just a broadleaf herbicide. But once the individual flowers start to turn brown and start to go dormant, it's too late for herbicide. So you're going back to mechanical management alternatives. So that said, I say that mowing and cutting can be a viable alternative, but you got to time it correctly, and you got to be persistent. You know, if you go out and mow teasel once in a year, you're not helping the problem. You know, if mowing is the methods that you choose, you're looking at several times of mowing, and then also at least several years. As I said below in the bottom point, you have to manage that seed bank for 3 to 5 years. So long-term control is going to be necessary. And I always encourage people to use fire in competitive plantings. By competitive plantings, you know, we usually use native prairie in our roadsides as competitive planting. Now that said, fire is not going to kill teasel. You know, a control burn is not going to kill it, but it can stimulate a lot of another species there that can give you competition for teasel. You know, it may be stimulating native prairie grasses, but typically if it's a solid stand of teasel, your fire is not going to carry well through it enough to really do any good. But you can work a fire through an area that's not severely infested, and it'll help get rid of all the junk out of the way. So then you can work other management methods in, whether that's mowing, a little bit of cutting, you know, and some spot spraying. And then if you just can't get there until it's too late, you know, if you get out there and you spot a patch of teasel and they're like the plants on the right, they're almost dormant. It's not too late, it's getting late, but you can hand cut those. We've cut them off with just pruning shears and then burn them. And that works okay if you've got, you know, maybe, you know, a small infestation, but when you've got hundreds and hundreds of them, that's not really a management method that's going to work. So as I said, each plant, you know, just of this picture right here, there's, you know, half a dozen seed heads, and each one of those is producing 2,000 seeds. So and they're all going to drop, and so you're going to need to manage that seed bank for 3 to 5 years to fully get rid of them. And meanwhile, you're going to need to be establishing other vegetation there as well to provide competition for the other rosettes that are going to keep taking off in future years. Okay. So I had this picture from a long time ago. I think my career was first starting, and so this one that I had taken here, this plant has 40 seed heads, and they're hard to see here. So I had seen this picture and I started counting them up, like 40 seed heads by 2,000 seeds a piece. So each one of those next year that you're going to have, a little quick math, I think that's 80,000 if I'm right, just out of one plant. So, if you can go to the next slide. If you can picture that slide, around your property, and you've got that many seed heads, and you're going to have to manage for 3 to 5 years, that's asking a lot of most landowners. So if you can, just like any invasive species, if you can get out and manage that invasive species before it reaches an infestation level, while that population is still small, basically early detection and rapid response, jump on that species before there's hundreds and thousands of them, you're going to have to spend a lot less money, time, frustration on that managing that species. Okay, so that's kind of who I am. And then if you need to get in touch with me in particular, then we have the Hawkeye CWMA, which is Hawkeye Cooperative Weed Management Area, and we're based here in eastern Iowa. I think we've got 7 counties represented, federal, state, and local folks that we are working, like most CWMAs, working to manage invasive species, across political borders. I believe I've got some pictures. Well, maybe they didn't come in it. Maybe they didn't make it into the presentation. Anyway, we have trifold brochures. I'll hold it up. I've got one here that I'll hold up here that we've got. This one happens to be Japanese stiltgrass, but we have, I believe, 30 some invasive species trifold brochures that are all available through the Hawkeye CWMA website. And that has, identification methods, management alternatives, timing, that sort of thing. And we have invasive species brochures on poison hemlock, teasel, and a whole host of other ones that they're pertinent to Iowa and how we do things here and our timing. But it's going to be a generality. Most of those same species that we are managing here, you're going to find in Indiana, and you're going to have similar methods and similar species, unfortunately. So I think we're ready for questions if we have any.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Emily. There are quite a few links in the chat. Some of them, as I promised, some have been resources and links to start with, and then the links that were in Emily's presentation and in Chris's are also there. So hopefully that helps with a little bit of convenience. Emily, I saw you answered one of the questions about parsnip hemlock in the chat. Do you want to just reiterate that for everyone?
Yeah, so anyone who didn't see it, the question was about cows eating poison hemlock. They can eat it, although usually that comes down to if it's a poor pasture without adequate forage, they're more likely to eat it then. However, the bigger risk that we found is that when it's in hay and dried and it's given to them, they don't distinguish it from the other plants in the hay, and you're much more likely to get poisonings from that.
I also had a question about the seed bank, because I think you mentioned it being about 2 years for poison hemlock, and someone else had commented that they'd seen that seeds could be viable for 6 to 7 years, and wondered if you thought maybe the type of soil that it's in might make a difference in its longevity, or if you had any other comments on that.
Yeah, so the 2 to 3 years, I can't remember which publication or research it was that I saw that in, but I believe it was extension based. I have seen some handouts list it longer, and that's not to say that in different regions it might not last longer. That's not my area of expertise, but it is still promising considering in our agricultural areas, some weed seeds can literally last for decades. So it's a lot shorter than that. And you also have to think about new seeds being brought in. So if it's along an area where it could be mowed or where water could be bringing in new seeds, that always has to be considered too.
We do have a question for Chris, but we had one more question about poison hemlock that just popped in. And it's really in regards to Missouri. So we don't have none of us are representing Missouri, but if in case any of you want to comment, it says, Is there any outreach to the Missouri Department of Agriculture to have poison hemlock added to the noxious weed list? Is there a reason it hasn't happened?
So I'm not sure with Missouri. I was actually a little surprised that Missouri didn't have it as a noxious weed, but I'm also not as familiar with how widespread it is there. So the whole state was not covered in the EDMAPS map, so it could just be that it hasn't reached those critical levels. It didn't used to be a noxious weed in Indiana, so that could just be it. And each state too, the noxious weed laws, some are very active about updating them and some are not. And with invasives, there's been kind of this murky crossover where do we regulate invasives via noxious weed laws, or do invasives get their own regulation? And each state has kind of tackled that differently. So that I'm not as familiar about. I will point out, I saw another comment about rashes. Typically, you do not break out in a rash from poison hemlock. That isn't to say that some individuals might not be sensitive, but it is not a known symptom of contact with poison hemlock. The biggest concern is ingestion, but other plants in the carrot family, such as wild parsnip, cow parsnip, giant hogweed, those are the ones that are the biggest danger for giving you a rash, really a chemical burn. So.
Great. We have a question for Chris here about teasel seeds. It says, if left undisturbed, when do seeds mature and drop? In other words, how late can you deadhead the teasel and bag the seeds without causing more spread?
Sure. So think of it like just like any flower species. Once it's completely dried, those seeds are going to start dropping. No different than like a purple cone flower seed. The seed head's very similar to those. So if it's completely brown and dry, it's going to start dropping. When the seed head still has some white on it, we still cut them and bag them, just because it's getting really late and it's almost too late for herbicides. So you're looking at mechanical methods. So we'll cut them and bag them up and burn them. We've tried a sidewalk torch, and we've tried, just making a big pile of them and dumping diesel on them. That will work. I view it as like when we go out and hand harvest prairie seeds. You're always going to have a few seeds drop off, even if you're picking them in January. Harvesting them and bagging them up. You're going to get the bulk of them, and that beats the alternative than to just letting all of them drop on the ground. So you grab a handful of gray-headed coneflower as an example. There's always some that slips through your hand and ends up on the ground. So you try to get as many as you can. But in Iowa, ours are starting to drop seed in probably late August, around in there, and then all the way through the fall and winter. So if you have a small infestation, I think that can be a great, especially in an organic situation. You don't have to necessarily use pesticides. You can use mechanical methods. If you have an infestation like that picture where there's literally thousands of seed heads, that's taking a little bit more time. So that's going to be asking a lot of a landowner or a volunteer.
I see Emily just responded to another comment. Okay. We have a couple more minutes. If I'll just kind of wrap up by thanking everybody for being here. We'll give everybody a second to, if you've got a last minute question, go ahead and drop it in. Just really appreciate everybody's time and interest in this topic. Again, if you're able to make a donation to help these kind of webinars continue, the donation link is kind of you scroll up to the top of the chat, you should be able to find that. Huge thanks to Emily and Chris for their time and efforts to present this material today. We've had a lot of comments that people really appreciate what's on your websites and the content that you provided today.
I saw two more comments in there about poison hemlock. So one was asking which poison one has purple stems, not spotty. I'm assuming Patricia means solid purple stems. I've occasionally seen the poison hemlock almost look like it's solid purple stems. However, the related water hemlock that I brought up, that can have solid purple stems. So it might be that. A good thing to do in those cases would be to take a look at the leaves to see if you can distinguish which one it is. And then we had a question about the noxious weed laws in Indiana. What can citizens do to encourage property owned by the city to take action? So in Indiana, our noxious weed laws, the noxious weed list is established by the state, but the enforcement of the laws is done by counties, and townships technically have authority as well, although I haven't seen them really step forward and do much enforcement. There's been a lot of counties talking about that have had their noxious weed boards basically disperse and not remain active. And with poison hemlock spreading more, there's been a lot of talk about maybe getting more active weed boards again in counties. So I would approach your county government and talk to them about it. Even if they don't have a weed board, the county government does have the authority to enforce the noxious weed laws even without a weed board. The weed board is just one mechanism that allows them to do that. And if they form a weed board, then there's specific legal instructions as to who must sit on that weed board and how they do things. If they don't, you could also try the township, but I don't know if the township would have any authority over the city on city property. So the county would be my recommendation.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. They provided their contact information. If you have any follow-up questions, you can reach out to either myself, or I think Emily and Chris are probably okay with that as well.
Sure.
And I know there were some questions. The recording will be available probably in a couple of weeks, but it'll be the same. You'll be able to link to it the same place where you registered. So mipin.org/presentations. We'll help you find the recording, or you can go to MIPIN's YouTube channel. All right. Thank you, everyone.